And a very warm welcome to all our guests, our guest speakers. And we really appreciate those who have taken the time to get up relatively early in New York and be with us today. So thank you very much for joining us. And we're going to share some information today with our viewers on the subject of riding the third wave. We've deliberately chosen that theme because there's been much talk about a third wave and who knows, maybe a fourth and whatever carries on thereafter. The analogy that we've used, and I'd like to share this thought with you when you have a look at it. And that is the analogy of a surfer. We have a choice as surfers as to whether or not we're going to ride the wave to the end or to be buried underneath it. And I think that's the choice that we faced as an organization. And certainly we use the opportunity to reach out to like-minded organizations today to join us in sharing their experiences with regard to COVID. We prefer, and we've chosen not to be buried under that wave, but rather come out of it stronger. And we'd like to share some of the information with you at a later stage. But let's introduce our speakers today. We are privileged to have a number of CEOs join us. The first one will be Hein Jordt, CEO of Ctrack. We've worked together for a number of years, as is the case with Barrie Arnold. Though, now, I must admit, Barrie is a relatively new acquisition to our fold, having reached out to share with us his information on distracted while driving. Mark Baker, Mygrow, and I'm quite sure you'll be fascinated when you have insights as to what dealing with EQ and coping with COVID had to do. And we personally, as a management team, spent the COVID lockdown periods with Mark's program. After that, we have Gavin Kelly, who's the CEO of RFA, and I think I've worked with him for about 15 years. And then Mark Grobbelaar, who will give us some insight into WHIP program. And that is going to be a live demonstration on self-protection. And given the fact that during COVID, we not only had to deal with its issues, but gender-based violence became a major problem. Mark will share some insightful information and give it to us by way of a live demo. We will conclude with questions and answers at the end, and then prize giving. So please do stay on. We've invited all the speakers to stay on until the end, so that should you have any questions, please, we invite you to join us over there. So with that, we're now going to hand over to Hein Jordt, who's going to give us some insights from the telematics industry during COVID and what lessons have been learned and maybe what you and I can benefit from. Hein, over to you.
Thanks, Eugene. Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for the opportunity. From a Ctrack point of view, we would take you through some with regards to what do we do and some insights with regards to the data and what we've seen, especially over the period during Easter, where we've done some analysis specifically for this webinar. So thanks for joining us. Thanks. So Ctrack, we are a global company with a footprint in 50 countries across the globe. We've got over 1,000 people that we've employed. We've been in the game for 35 years, and we are proudly South African company. In due time, there's some exciting news in the pipeline that we will share with everyone. So over the years, experience has taught us that an end-to-end scalable solution provides sustainability, not only for ourselves, but even for our clients. And that was the basis on which we built the business. So if one looks at the key management areas, every business, we believe, no matter what business you are, have got these 5 critical pillars that you need outputs on that needs to be managed. One looks at the risk management, cost management, revenue increase, operational control, and asset management. So you'll see the blue is the data drivers, which gives us the output on those specific key management areas. So we have moved from moving the dots towards data. Everyone will remember that traditionally telematics was hindsight. We were looking at the history, what has happened in the past, and we'll take action on that. Then there was a second phase where everybody moved into insight, where we start looking a little bit more intelligently with regards to the data. And the next step is foresight. That is the future for telematics, to start doing projections and start advising our customers of potential issues or points that they need to look at. So if one looks at our current data infrastructure, to give you some sort of an indication on the amount of data that we receive per day. So on an average 24-hour period, we receive 1.1 million messages. And in peak periods, we can go up to 2.2 million messages. The size of our databases, our active database, which runs 40 days worth of data, is 4 terabyte. And in our warehouse environment, it is 5 terabytes worth of data. So if one look at data and you express data into seconds, then one would say that 1 megabyte would be equal to 11 days. And 1 gigabyte would be equal to 31 years, and 1 terabyte would be 31 millenniums. So it just gives you an indication of the amount of data we're sitting on. So let's get a little bit more practical. There's a sea of data that we need to put into a meaningful application for our customers going forward. So you'll all remember that traditionally one looks at the data in a format like this. So if I just take the 1st of April and we just took a snapshot of 128,000 vehicles, we received 8.6 million positions, and we had 3,459 incidents, and the total distance has been traveled of 7.8 million kilometers. So if one looks at the speed violations, for every 100 kilometers, we will have 2 speed violations recorded. This is the traditional way that data was viewed by customers and even ourselves. So if one looks at going forward, moving from the traditional graphs and data, looking at heat maps, and here's some insight regarding the Easter weekend. You'll see that the departure out of Gauteng was clearly visible where people were leaving Gauteng on the N3. What is very interesting is that you'll see that at Pietermaritzburg as well as Harry Smith, where there is law enforcement, there was a reduction in speed, which shows that it's working very, very well, the law enforcement in those areas. What's interesting was that the N1 down to Cape Town didn't have as much traffic as the N3 to Durban, which clearly was maybe a little bit too far for guys or people to visit over the Easter period. So if one looks at on the 2nd of April, which was the Friday, which was Easter Friday, you'll see the decline in traffic. Interesting was on the N1 down to up to Bloemfontein, there was still pretty much traffic. After Bloemfontein, it was quiet. You'll see in the Durban area, KwaZulu-Natal area, there was a fair amount of traffic, and people were in that area over that specific time with a lot of congestion. So if we look at during the April period, you'll see that congestion in Durban, Gauteng, people will start coming back on the 5th. See, there's no place like home. People were speeding. More and more people leaving, coming back on the Monday before they kick off on the Tuesday for work. And if one do a little bit of a deeper dive, we'll see that the activity in Gauteng over the period was pretty much normal in the early mornings between 6 and 7 as traditionally, and even in the afternoons. So if one looks at over the period on the highways, what was interesting, the speeding between the on and off ramps, there was an increase in speeding events over the period. As I mentioned, the congestion over the period in the Gauteng area between 6 and 9 in the morning, pretty much the same as on a normal work day. Even in the afternoons between 4 and 7 p.m. Also a lot of congestion in the Gauteng area, which contributes hugely to a lot of speeding, harsh braking violations. If we break down and we drill down to street level, we will see that at the interactions, there was a harsh acceleration, a big amount of harsh acceleration events and braking, which contributes to a lot of fuel wastage compared to the average speed that guys were traveling on the highway over the same period. So if one looks at the total period over a period of 12 months, we recorded 384 million events over a 12-month period. Speed is still one of the biggest contributors to these events. Typical is 46% is the road speed. So the way that we record is that there's a speed limit of 60 kilometers or 80 kilometers, and we compare the events to those speed limits in that specific area. And then the 51% speed contribution is clearly where a customer has set their vehicle at a speed limit of 95 or 100. And that still shows you that overall, not only road speed, but also normal speed violations is one of the biggest contributions in total. So then, so the big thing still stays that we need to manage our drivers, look at our drivers. Speed is the main problem. You'll also see that the harsh acceleration events is the second biggest contribution with harsh braking. And that's from us. Thank you very much and stay safe. Thanks, Eugene.
Hein, thank you very much. I must admit, even though we gave you the brief as to what you should talk about, you still surprised me somewhat. And yes, you did a brilliant sell of Ctrack. But I think that overview of what traffic conditions and the like are in the Easter period just helps us understand a little bit more details of what's happening. So thank you very much. And of course, when you highlighted the overspeeding, and of course we anticipate that July, with the planned introduction of auto, if organizations are not doing something to address driver behavior, which contributes to 95% of crashes, they are going to have a major problem. So if you can stop your screen share there, Hein, we're now going to introduce Barrie Arnold. You will have seen his designation as the CRO. Interestingly, the Chief Revenue Officer, and I enjoyed that take on it because obviously Barrie is making a whole lot of money. He left South Africa and he went to the US. But more to the point, distracted while driving is an issue that's growing around the world. And we've seen activities and actions that are taken to prevent this. Barrie is going to give us an insight from the US and develop very slightly or briefly what we're doing in South Africa as part of a bigger issue to deal with distracted while driving. Barrie, over to you and welcome to South Africa again.
Thank you, Eugene. It's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to coming back to South Africa very soon. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So as a former South African and a technology entrepreneur for the last 25 years, one of the things that my partner and I really looked at was the epidemic before this last one of distracted driving, what people are doing on the roads that they shouldn't be doing, and some of the triggers that have resulted from it. As you probably know, distracted driving is extremely difficult to police. It's much easier to catch someone for speeding or for drunk driving or for not wearing their seatbelt, which are some of the primary causes of serious and fatal accidents. What isn't so easy is to catch someone when they're on their phone while driving, and yet that is the #1 cause of collisions on our roads. So what I wanted to do was take you through a couple of the insights that we've learned over the years, but more specifically as it relates to South Africa and the last 12 months during COVID. So we all know that Regulation 308A says that in South Africa, using a handheld communication device is illegal. But as I've just said, being able to police that is nearly impossible. And so what it really requires is for private enterprise, for consumers driving their own vehicles, for insurance companies, for employers, and even the network operators like MTN and Vodacom to take a stand against distracted driving. It requires more than just a billboard on the side of the road saying it can wait. So the statistics that we have available are that 52% of crashes in South Africa are distracted driving related. I personally think that's underreported because, again, you're not going to tell the police officer that you were on your phone when you get pulled over or when you're in a crash. And again, I choose to use the word crash rather than accident because if you're on your phone, it's not an accident. But the knock-on effect of distracted driving for the South African economy is 307 billion rand a year. And again, probably underreported. So there are significant effects that happen downstream from the crash beyond just deploying police services, ambulances, the medical care that's required. But even a fender bender in rush hour traffic causes all of the people behind that crash to be late for work. If they're on an hourly pay, they miss the first hour of their paycheck. Meetings get missed, appointments get missed. And so the downstream effect of these avoidable, preventable crashes is significant on the entire economy, including the people that were not directly involved in that collision. So the data that we saw from 2020 is that despite a significant drop in overall kilometers driven, obviously because of lockdown, there was a significant increase in phone use by drivers. And if you think about what you were doing for the last 12 months in lockdown, you were probably stuck to your phone for most of the time. And so when people got back into their vehicles, it was almost instinctual that when the phone buzzes, they'd pick it up. Not because they were doing it deliberately, but because this is the habit that they'd formed and created even more so stuck in their homes rather than out in the traffic. And that resulted in a 63% increase in collisions per million miles or kilometers. And unfortunately, it also resulted in a sizable spike in road deaths. Now, this statistic here of 24% over the previous month is a US stat. But as you can see, 24% increase in road deaths over the 12-month period, even though mileage had dropped. And that's the biggest increase in 96 years in the US. And the stats are tracking to be fairly similar across other countries as well, including South Africa. One of the biggest challenges that we face with distracted driving is the fact that the numbers are underreported. And so the statistics around the effects that it has on the economy, on companies, on insurance companies is very difficult to gather. And so we use what we can in order to come up with the answers. Sorry, I skipped a few. So we work with a company called ZenDrive that has apps installed in millions of vehicles around the world. And one of the very alarming statistics that they came up with was the dramatic increase in 3 areas during COVID. A 27% increase in speeding, a 38% increase in phone usage, and a 25% increase in hard braking. And what that means is that when people did leave their homes, they were in a hurry. They were trying to get from A to B even quicker than they did in 2019 and previously. That they were panicking and using their phones more often if they got a message. Was it urgent? Was it someone saying, come back home, get out of where you are today? And then, of course, an increase in hard braking is indicative of people being distracted. So you hit the brakes really hard if you're not concentrating on the flow of traffic, if you're not anticipating traffic as well as you should. And then ZenDrive also did a report on the number of collisions that were recorded through the vehicles that they track. And they took into account 86,000 collisions And they found that 57% of those collisions involved phone use within the 16-second period or closer to the impact of the collision. So again, these statistics are significantly higher than 2019 or before. And so what we believe is that there are a combination of factors at play here, which I'll get into in a little while. South Africa is actually at a greater risk than most other countries because it falls into a category where there is significant low and middle income interspersed with the middle and upper income. And so what we find is that over half of all road fatalities and injuries are pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists. Because of the mix of how people travel, this becomes a significant issue. And of course, when a pedestrian gets hit by a vehicle, the likelihood of a fatality is significantly higher than if two vehicles crash into each other, and the same for the other categories there. And so what we see is that road traffic crashes have a higher impact on developing countries and their gross domestic product than on developed countries like Europe and North America. So what are the consequences? I think one of the most important things to understand on this call, particularly for those of you that are in the B2B space, the fleet space, the insurance space, is that commercial vehicle collisions are a significantly higher percentage as it relates to distracted driving. Why is that? Because people who are on the road.
My husband thought the wife a certain cover because only from standing cover, so that would have been a massive drama.
Yeah.
So she purchased extra insurance and took an
Sorry, I'm just
additional
going to ask you
drama.
to mute.
The one guy phoned booked the Merc. We don't have a Merc. Was simply Marsh's fault.
Yeah. So commercial vehicles have a higher incidence of distracted driving because you're doing two things at once. You're working and you're driving, whether you're delivering packages or parcels, or whether you're driving to a job site or a meeting, you are on the clock. And when you receive an email, it could be time sensitive. When you receive a message, it could change the nature of your trip. And so even though companies have policies in place that say no using your phone while driving, they're also telling people to be responsive and to provide the best possible customer service. And so what we see is a number of effects as a result of a collision, both on the consumer side, but more importantly on the employer side, is that it's not just a damage to the vehicle, but it's also the equipment that might be contained within that vehicle and the cargo that it's carrying.
Yes.
So whether it's your cargo or somebody else's cargo, there is a significant problem.
No, he understands.
And we also see revenue loss. Obviously, if your vehicle is off the road, you're unable to perform the job that vehicle is required to do. And that also increases your insurance if you get sequential crashes that you have to go back to your insurance company on. Of course, injury is a major one. You're losing the time that your employees are able to work for you, and therefore you've got productivity loss. You have one less employee, potentially multiple employees that are out of work for an extended period of time. Even if you have the opportunity to rehire, there is still productivity loss because that person was better at their job than bringing someone else in. Of course, there's liability, there's litigation. One of the things that's difficult to measure but has a significant impact on companies is reputational damage. ABC Corporation's van crashed into my child or my company car, and we're going to have to do something about that. That's a terrible company because of what they've done. Look what they've done. And that reputational damage gets even worse when you pour on social media, where people are standing on the side of the road, taking photographs of the damage, putting it up on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook with your logo on the side of the van that has crashed into somebody or hit a pedestrian. And then, of course, just fines and license suspensions are a risk for every single business out there. If you lose a driver because they're no longer able to drive, their license has been suspended, that's a problem. If you're continuously hit with 750 Rand fines every time someone gets caught at a red light with their phone in their hand, which is illegal, it will certainly mount up. So what we found is that companies have got policies, and they've said, well, if the policy is no phones, we'll just use CarPlay, we'll just use Android Auto, because those solutions read messages, and so it's hands-free. But, and I won't spend too much time on this, one thing for you to know is that Google and Apple have no real intention of safety when they build these solutions. They're really just trying to replicate their own phone experience on the infotainment system. And what that does is it actually creates an even more distracting experience for the driver. It doesn't provide any data to the employer or the insurance company. And what about the millions of vehicles that don't have those technologies in place? So what we built, and we leverage the knowledge and the know-how of companies like MasterDrive, is a technology-first platform that essentially removes the need or the urge for someone to look at their device. So Ping is a voice platform that automatically reads your SMS, WhatsApp, email, and other messages out loud without you touching your phone. It's a productivity tool. Is there an urgent message? Do we have to tell the driver to turn around? Are we able to communicate with all of our drivers in the field instantly without them transgressing their policy, which is no phones while driving? And then it extends beyond the vehicle as well. So you have employees in the field. They might be working with their hands. They might be preparing meals or commuting or exercising or doing other things that are that make looking at their phone inconvenient. And so our platform is safety plus productivity. Can we communicate when looking at your phone is inconvenient, or more importantly, illegal? And so once we have something that the driver actually appreciates, which is now I'm not going to have to get all the way to the destination to find out that the appointment's been canceled because I've listened to the message, we have given them something that actually makes their work on a daily basis better. We can now provide them with insights into how they drive. And so telematics, while it's not new, can be layered on top of this engagement tool, which is voice, to say, how are you driving? Do you anticipate traffic? Do you adhere to the speed limits? Do you drive smoothly? Do you touch your phone while driving? And this level of insight follows two paths. One is the driver, where inside the app, they get to see their own score. And that's where the biggest change happens, on the roads, behind the wheel, where they can see on a trip-by-trip basis how to improve. And then more importantly, as Hein said, you look at the data on the back end and say, well, how do we address this on an employee-by-employee basis, on a district basis, so that we can reward safer driving and make people part of the solution and not part of the problem? And so to summarize, how do we solve this going forward, coming out of COVID, where people have been even more distracted, even more tied to their phones? The importance is that we create a culture of safety for everyone and that everyone buys into it. What are the tools that we're giving our drivers that can make them safer, that give them more insight into how they drive? There's a big misconception that I'm a safe driver, but everyone else is terrible. And when I see someone on their phone in traffic, it drives me nuts. But if I quickly pick up my phone just to glance over and see what that SMS or WhatsApp message is about, that's not distracted driving. I've never had a crash. And so that's an important part of it, is show people how they actually drive. Are they a good driver, and how would they improve? And then don't do this on a once a month, a once a year basis. This is something that requires continuous engagement. Show people who your good drivers are, show people how they can improve, reward safer behaviors, and do it on a regular basis with visibility. And being open to policy change is also important. So a lot of fleet companies that we've spoken to have said, we have a completely set policy. It's no phones while driving, and that's it. And the irony is, I ask them, well, how's that policy working out for you? You're still seeing crashes in the field. You just don't know that they're distracted driving. The driver says he hit a pothole or her foot slipped off the brake. And obviously those are not always accurate. It could be the phone in the hand, but be open to incorporating technology in order to help drivers, and you'll have a much safer culture within the organization. And then, of course, as Hein said earlier, use data to manage risk. One of the biggest challenges that managers have is the sea of data. Where do we start? How do we accurately manage this? If you understand that data can reduce your insurance rate, that can increase the productivity that you have within your group, then it becomes a far more compelling reason to do it. And then work with your providers to say, I don't need all of this data. Here are the things that interest me most. Here are the things that will assist me to manage my audience. And that's what you get. Well, that's what you get on a weekly basis. You get a one-page report that you can take to your managers and say, here are our top 10 drivers. Here are our bottom 10 drivers. Here are the areas that we need to improve as a business. And here are the financial risks and the reputational risks to our business. So I think that there were some significant learnings coming out of COVID, the biggest of which is that phone use is on the increase. And sitting on the fence and writing a policy that says, please don't use your phones is not going to work. You have to be way more proactive in order to protect your business, but also protect other road users. So we're offering a free trial to anyone today and going forward. If you'd like to try the Ping app for free, certainly go ahead, scan the QR code or download it from the Google Play Store or the App Store. If you want to do a search, it's Ping Loud in your App Store. But we'd love to hear from you. A key part of building this technology platform is that it's continuously moving. So feel free to reach out to me or through the MasterDrive team. And it's been a pleasure being able to present to you. Thank you very much.
Barrie, thank you very much. We appreciate those insights, and I'm glad that you highlighted the fact that the statistics that we have are probably underreported, because South Africans are notorious for disobeying the law, and the use of cell phone is certainly one of the primary ones. Just as Barrie indicated, we have a partnership with Ping Loud, and this is part of our wider application. So if you'd like to just stop your screen share there, Barrie, and we will also be giving a year's subscription to the Ping Loud app toward the end, so that you can get greater benefits from it. Please, as you've indicated, and I see one of our customers, Trevor, indicates that policies are not good enough. By the way, we have policies. If you don't have any, we will happily make them available to you so that you can start the process. And our no-sell, the MasterDrive no-sell, of which Ping can be a part, is certainly one of the tools that will enable companies to customize any of their policies to suit their particular needs. Just before we move over to Mark Baker, maybe some wondered why we call this a colloquium and instead of a symposium or a webinar. The colloquium is defined as something where we speak together, and it comes from the Latin word. So we speak together and we share information. So it's slightly different. We're not here to lecture to you. We're not here to sell our product, but we're here to advise. So we trust that everyone will benefit from it. Mark, by the way, has developed EQ programs. As indicated, our management team spent COVID lockdown listening to Mark and his accomplices. So let's hand over to Mark and see what lessons they've learned. And by the way, he's giving away to everyone in attendance an opportunity to do an EQ program with Mygrow. Mark, over to you, please.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me today, Eugene. Just want to make sure I'm coming through on that side. Are you hearing me?
We can hear you. We're just waiting for your screen share if you're going to put it up.
Yes. Tell me if that's coming through, guys. Just a thumbs up from anyone would be fantastic.
Yes, no problem.
Great. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but between Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Google Meets, and all sorts of other stuff, you often don't know where the buttons are. So hopefully I'm coming through on that side. Thanks so much for having me. I'm going to be sharing a little bit on the impact of emotional intelligence on some of the new world realities that we are facing. And I just want to make sure that I'm presenting full screen here. Eugene, is that coming through for you now in full screen? Great, thanks. So yeah, I would really just love the opportunity to download to some of you what the context of the new world is, why EQ is important in that new world, why emotional intelligence would even be relevant in a conversation like we're having here today in this colloquium, and why technology is going to help to really just drive human behavior in this new world of work. And so I really am just hoping that you can sit back and just get a sense of some of the geography of the psychological aspects or the human aspects of business in the new world, and that it will really just prompt some insightful thoughts for you in terms of how you lead your business and how you can have the biggest impact on it. So I want to start off with this. I don't know if any of you know what this is, or if you're familiar with this picture or this kind of trend. From any kind of business perspective, this is a very negative trend. And what this is the depiction of the total sales volume globally of a particular product. You can see the share of shipments internationally there between the second quarter of 2007, where it was just up above 50%, all the way down to the second quarter of 2013. So you can see that's kind of over a 6-year period. Something happened to this organization that took them from being really an apex predator, if you like, dominant in terms of the volumes of sales and their market share, to really just slumping down to something that was irrelevant. And I think many of us know the story. It's the story of Nokia. And, you know, having a look at some of the shifting landscapes that have happened, not only as a result of COVID, but very specifically with Industry 4.0, it's critical for any leaders in organizations to make sure that they are not missing certain things that Nokia missed, that will obviously cause a massively negative impact on the company. And I want to put it to you that I think Nokia's mistake lay, and many of you I'm sure have read a lot about it, but Nokia's demise lay in that they had not been able to spot the shifting landscapes of the new world. So why did they plummet? Well, they missed the shifting landscapes of the new world. And at that time, it was, of course, the shifting landscape into smartphones and the technology that Apple and Samsung brought in. And just by the way, as a benchmark, Apple and Samsung are sitting in the region of 20 to 25% of kind of market share of total shipments. And Nokia was up at over 50%. So this is a radical plummeting. And I want to put it to you that in this time, we're going to look at 4 different things. I'd love to share with you some of the shifting landscapes that are certainly prominent in the world of organizational psychology. I think they definitely are prominent in your world so that we can be aware of them. The next is to have a look at how we can leverage human capital in this new world and why that would even be an important point of conversation. Then I'd love to just share with you some of the new world EQ technology that can help you in your business to navigate some of these shifting landscapes, and then your role as leaders in terms of this conversation. So that's what we'll look at in the time we have together. And then I believe right at the end of the colloquium, there'll be time for questions. So let's have a look at some of these shifting landscapes. None of this, I expect, will be new to any of you in isolation, but perhaps the conversation together will add some great value. There are 4 main shifting landscapes that exist right now in the world. Technology, of course, is constantly shifting and changing. Is shifting, and of course, the way that leadership is lived out in this kind of 4 massive industrial revolutions. We, of course, now are sitting well into Industry 4.0, the 4th industrial revolution. And what I'm really wanting us to take from this is that the technology contribution has caused the industrial revolutions to occur. And we can't just look at the technology shifts and think that if we keep up with the technology shifts, then we will be on par and be competitive in the world of work. Because, of course, there are these 3 other massive shifts that happen in the human realm. And as a result of this technology contribution and the shifting industrial revolutions, there's been a shift in skills needed in the world of work. Let's just have a look at the shifting skills between Industry 3.0 and Industry 4.0. And you will know that at the beginning of Industry 3.0, there was this high need for technical skill. Your academic qualifications or the kind of technical prowess that one could bring to the world of work was massively employable and recruitable. This was what leaders needed to drive organizations forward. And quite literally, we would see those with high financial technical skill ending up in the levels of CFO, CEO, if you like, because technical skill was what was needed to lead an organization forward. But as the industrial revolutions have happened, of course, Google, robotics, and artificial intelligence have really started taking a lot of the heavy lifting of some of the technical skill that was needed in the past. And so the skills that have now been on the rise are those that were quite low in demand in the past, social and emotional competencies. These were not primary in the recruitment process in the past, and they have slowly been on the rise, where now in the Industry 4.0, the major skill sets that humans bring to the world of work are those that involve social and emotional competencies that lie in the realm of emotional intelligence. Things like leadership that can be added, the ability to create an environment of creativity and innovation, and certainly organizational culture. And so there's been this skill shift that's happened. Then there's, of course, also been a shift in the workforce. And this is no news to anyone. There's a lot of debate in the academic literature around the different generational cohorts. But you can make no mistake, and this is, by the way, just the current global workforce, or certainly that of last year, is that the Gen Zs and the millennials are really making up a majority of the workforce right now. And so if we have a look at it, if most of the senior management is sitting, maybe some of the millennials are, some of the younger millennials have made it into the kind of exec level space, but it's the Gen Xers and baby boomers that are needing to lead the bulk of the workforce that are the Gen Zs and millennials. And the issue here for us as organizational leaders is that these generations function according to certain very specific value systems, those that are rooted in authenticity. Authenticity and transparency are very difficult things for baby boomers and some of the Gen Xers. Things like needing freedom, think flexible working hours, think an ability to choose which work I'll be involved in. And then this concept of co-creation, literally at times co-creating organizational policy. And this is a radically different way of leading that we need to pay attention to. So there's this workforce shift that we find ourselves in. And then, of course, lastly, there's a leadership shift. And I'm going to go very quickly here because, of course, many of you, I would hope, are familiar with some of the different leadership paradigms that have emerged in the leadership literature through the years. Pick up any kind of beginner level leadership textbook, and you'll see in the small print underneath here the different theories of leadership emerging, charismatic leadership or trait theories of leadership. All I'm wanting us to see is that through the millennia, there have been these significant paradigm shifts in leadership that have emerged, starting with an I paradigm of leadership. This was a paradigm where leaders were born, not made. So someone is born with certain traits in trait theory or a certain kind of charisma that people can aggregate around. So I am this great leader, and so I'm going to lead whatever this particular group of people is. Then there was a shift through scientific management to an it paradigm of leadership, where people started being viewed as literally just pieces of the engine in the organization. And they were seen as parts in the process, replaceable. Scientifically managed, if you like, and there was transactional leadership theories, etc. And then there was the shift through transformational leadership into a we paradigm of leadership, where now there was this inclusivity of leaders wanting to say that, literally together everyone achieves more. Team, that we're going to do this together. I'm going to be inclusive as a leader. And what we're seeing now with some of these other shifts in the world of work is that unless leaders move into what has been labeled a servant leadership paradigm, or even values-based leadership fits into this thou paradigm, where leaders start lifting up their employees as having higher value than even themselves as the leader, and definitely as having higher value than the organization. What's being found empirically in some of the research from organizations around the world is that unless as leaders we are functioning from this paradigm, we are probably going to become more and more redundant in terms of our ability to influence the current world of work. And so if we have a look at the shifting landscapes, and what's very important to note about these is that most of them are related to human capital. As a psychologist, I can do very little to help you with keeping up with the technology shifts that are happening. You need the guys from Ping to come and help you with that. What psychology can help with is the skills that are needed, those emotional and social competence, how to deal with this workforce shift of different generations, and then leadership, how we can actually develop our leadership competence. So let's have a look then at how we can leverage human capital in this world of work, in this kind of new wave, if you like, to use the language of this colloquium, this new wave, a new world that has been ushered in with these shifting landscapes. How do we leverage the human capital there? Well, human capital, I mean, involves so many different competencies. They often get clustered under HR. You know, HR needs to deal with that. HR needs to sort it out. And if you have a look across this list, these are just different factors from organizational psychology that are prominent in the literature around those that impact on the functioning of employees. And if you just have a look at the first two, I mean, these have a radical impact on your performance as an organization. Employee engagement, radical impact on how successful you can be as an organization. Get it wrong and you're going to struggle. Get it right and you're going to flourish. Organizational culture, another one. What I would love to do is really just highlight three that maybe are less known in your work environment, workplace incivility being one of them. Perhaps one that's more known, psychological stress, and then one that I think is on top of mind for all of us, which is leadership. And I want to show you how, as organizational psychologists, we would go about calculating the impact on the work environment and how to leverage it. Now, believe it or not, if you cluster workplace incivility, which in a word is rudeness, literally like working on your phone in the middle of a meeting, not making eye contact, or not responding to a presentation that someone's giving in a live environment, etc. That's workplace incivility. But if you cluster these together, incivility, psychological stress, and leadership, they account together for a variance of 12% in annual revenue. And I'm going to show you how we get to this figure. You can go and do the calculation by yourself. There's a wonderful free platform called humanimpactaudit.com. humanimpactaudit.com. It's an amazing platform where you can go and run the calculations that I'm about to show you to have a look at the impact of some of these psychological factors on your work environment. Let's have a look at it. So just taking these three, if we have a look at who the people are that are being impacted, we have to ask ourselves this question. These people being impacted by workplace incivility, by psychological stress, by leadership, would we consider them to be an asset or an expense? Now, if you ask any organizational leader that's involved in the finances, they'll start fidgeting. Because, of course, we want to say, well, of course, they're an asset. These are our people. We need to make sure that there's not workplace incivility, that they're not under too much psychological stress so that they can think straight, that they are being led in an effective way so that these assets, of course, can be an asset to the company. But in reality, from a financial perspective, we know that our staff sit under an expense on the profit and loss in the financial statements, and they lie there under the wages. And so the question left for us, or salaries and wages. So there's a bit of a tricky question here that we need to ask ourselves as leaders. Do we treat our human capital as an asset, or do we treat them as an expense? And it's really important the way we answer this question, because we need to ask ourselves, are we actually bleeding human capital without knowing it, paying this expense without getting a return on it, and so treating it like an expense? And let's have a look at those three that I highlighted earlier. Well, workplace incivility alone has a negative impact on voluntary turnover. It accounts for 12% of voluntary turnover, 20% of productivity, and 13% of executives' time is spent just remediating the relational gripes that come from workplace incivility. This is office politics or conflict in the work environment. Now, you can just do a calculation from payroll across your executives, calculate 13% of their annual salaries, and that'll give you an idea of what it's costing the company if you're not able to effectively remediate workplace incivility. Then in terms of stress, you may or may not know this, but psychological stress accounts for 49% of all sick days taken each year and has a radically dampening effect on productivity. Again, this is massively calculatable if you just have a look at payroll. And then, of course, leadership accounts for a significant proportion of staff turnover and staff productivity. But if you have a look at turnover, this includes the loss of IP in the organization. This includes, of course, recruitment costs, onboarding costs, the sluggishness of a member to come in and be able to start being productive in the work environment. And so if we don't get these right, amidst these shifting landscapes of the human capital factors in the business, we really are sitting with a scenario where we are paying as an expense for something that's not generating a return for us. And I like to think of it as bleeding human capital because it makes it like very graphic for me in my mind, in my role as CEO in my context. And so what does this translate to in terms of actual cost? Now, what I've done is I've gone and run an actual calculation for us at humanimpactaudit.com. Again, you can go and run this calculation for yourself. I've taken a 100-person organization, and you can think of this, if your context is far bigger, which I expect it is, you can just multiply this out through different business units. I just thought 100 size department or business unit would be easy for you to multiply out. I've put 5 kind of senior level managers there to account for executives' time. Mid-level managers, you can see I've applied 10 in there, and then 85 other employees, 10 of which are involved in sales. That's quite important. Some of these psychosocial factors have a massive impact on sales. And you can see here, I've plugged in some salaries here. You can decide whether that's high or low. Again, you can go do this calculation on your own. I've put in a profit margin of about 20%. Of course, this would be something that you'd need to put in. But to sustain this business, we need an average monthly revenue of 8.1 million to just keep the lights on. And let's have a look at what some of these psychosocial factors translate into. Well, I said to you earlier, it averages out at about 12% of annual revenue gets impacted. In this particular environment with the numbers I've put in, it's a 9.73% of dampened revenue is impacted by these psychological factors. And you can see the projection here over 3 years with the total on the right-hand side. And some of these are crazy. I highlighted senior management time or executive levels time. You can see that over 3 years, it's 1.4 million. You can see the productivity loss from incivility is just radical. And by the way, all of this research is included in the human impact audit. It's all given there to you, so you can go and do it. By the way, I get no return from human impact audits, completely free service for you to go and do. So all that I'm illustrating here is we've got these shifting landscapes. Many of them relate to human capital and us getting it right. And there's a massive cost to us not getting this right as leaders in organizations. And let's have a look then at what the return on investment could be if we actually do something about it. Well, in terms of EQ development, Eugene was mentioning that I'm involved in emotional intelligence development. We leverage at Mygrow, we leverage technology to do that for you. And that's the free giveaway that Eugene alluded to. But if you have a look at developing emotional intelligence, this is, by the way, plotted on some empirical studies that show the kind of impact that developing emotional intelligence can have on general productivity, on the improvement of sales when people overcome their sense of inadequacy or self-esteem issues. It has a radical impact on their sales productivity. Sales figures start having a positive impact. Leadership targets are impacted. And by the way, emotional intelligence can have an 85% improvement on complex problem-solving productivity. In other words, the productivity for roles where there's complex problem solving needed. So that's at a much more senior level in the organization. And so all this is saying is we really need emotional intelligence development to help us to navigate some of these emotional intelligence in your organization. Here you can see this is plotted, by the way, on a 5% increase in emotional intelligence, plotted on that same organization. These figures, by the way, are taken according to that human impact audit. And you can see there's a 418% return on investment with just a 5% shift in emotional intelligence. And by the way, through some of the technology that you're going to be given free access to, we're achieving in the region of an 8% shift in emotional intelligence over a 1-year period. And so you can see that there really seems to be an impressive return on investment. I mean, Eugene, for my money, I would be investing in EQ development if I was in this colloquium right now. That's certainly getting me a better return right now than the JSE from where I'm sitting. So we need to ask ourselves this question: why is there this kind of significant return from emotional intelligence? Why would emotional intelligence be such an important part of the current world of work? And it is because winning in the new world, and I would put it to you that surviving in the new world requires high emotional intelligence. It's not just me that says this as a organizational psychologist, as someone whose bread and butter is the world of EQ, because of course I'm biased. But this also comes from the World Economic Forum that pegged emotional intelligence a few years ago as being one of the top 10 critical skills for people in all industries, at all levels, and in every region of the world. EQ is massively important. And many of you may not know too much about emotional intelligence, or you may have just heard it as EQ, and you might already be sitting there rolling your eyes. You were rolling your eyes, when you saw a psychologist was presenting. But EQ is a well-established academic construct. You can see a number of academic models on the left side. There's a set of about 25 core competencies, and cast your eyes across them. Any one of these competencies can radically impact on one's ability to be successful. And as you scale this out through an organization, this starts having massive ramifications for how effective people can be. Fundamentally, emotional intelligence is about balancing the emotional centers in the brain at the neurological level with the frontal lobes. And this literally means that you are able to think and function straight. The definition of EQ, of course, being that ability to manage myself effectively and to navigate interactions with others most appropriately. And I think we all know at the leadership level how powerful that is. I'd love to just do an illustration of this. I think I've got just a few moments left. By my clock, Eugene, by the way, I've got about 5 minutes left. So I'm expecting you'll give me a little bit of a time tracker if that's not the case. 2 minutes, great. You can see here that if you induce different emotions, this is an experiment done on different emotions, where there is positive emotion, there is a more than 50% less of an ability to be innovative if negative emotion is induced. So if you are sitting in an environment where leadership is toxic, the organizational culture is toxic, there's workplace incivility, there's stress, people are literally able to be are not able to be as innovative as those that have positive emotion. And this has a radical impact for us. And so New World EQ technology, Mygrow is able to develop, measure, and track emotional intelligence. You'll get a free subscription there. I want to just jump over a few slides over here, just for the sake of time. That free subscription you'll get is going to be able to help you to develop your EQ at scale. And what I wanted to put to you was that your role as leaders going forward are really to start shifting the conversation to one of actually leading rather than managing. Because in the past, we have used our reporting in organizations to manage or lead the organization from financial reporting. But now what is possible through some of this EQ development technology is to get psychosocial metrics on the humans in the organization, where the new world leadership is going to be taking reporting from financial reporting as well as human capital reporting on the psychosocial factors in the organization, and use that reporting to actually sustain successful organizations in this new world environment. So I'm really excited for you to try it out. Eugene, I'm sure, is going to make you aware of where you can get that. It's a link that I'll just pop into the chat pane, by the way, and it's in the email that was sent to you. So give it some thought. I'm excited to see what us as leaders can do with this new world way of leading through psychosocial factors and the financial sides of business. Thanks so much for having me, Eugene. Over to you again.
Hey, Mark, thank you very much. Your bio says that you love public speaking, and there's evidence of that. So thank you. Thank you for the passion that you bring to this. And I must just tell you, in our journey, and it is a journey, it's not a one-stop fix where you spend 5 minutes. It is over an extended period. One of the first things that we will learn to identify was 3 good things. Now, when you do that the first day, it's easy. The second day, But by the time you walk the journey to several days, several weeks, you are really challenged. Please, Mark is making that available. You deserve it. You've earned it, and I encourage you to do that, please. And just for those of you who may have wondered how many we had registered for this event, there was 171 registered. You see a number of 97, but please bear in mind that many are sitting on YouTube. And for those of you who want and have asked the question, a recording will be made available. So Mark, thank you very much. Thanks for making the time available, and we wish you every success. Next, we have Gavin Kelly. Gavin, I know that this, Mark, wasn't a difficult path to walk for you afterwards because you are so eloquent, and we know that having worked with you over the number of years, you will share some insightful information. Gavin Kelly, the CEO of the Road Freight Association.
Thanks, Eugene. I've been disabled from screen sharing at the moment. So if you could just sort that out for me.
I'm sure that they're busy in the background, so just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself in the meantime, Gavin.
You can see how beautiful I am. Doesn't that say it all? Good morning, everybody. My name's Gavin Kelly. I'm from the Road Freight Association, the Chief Executive at the Road Freight Association. It's good to be with you today, and I think the previous couple of presenters really have set the scene in terms of where we're going in this new world. And that's what I'm going to deal with today. I'm going to deal with what has happened in terms of transport and logistics and where we're going. And it's actually quite interesting to see how the world is changing. I've been involved in transport for a number of years. I'm not going to tell you how old, because then you'll know how close I am to pension. Right, let's have a look at COVID-19, the very first year. And that almost seems like decades ago. We've all lived in this pandemic, under this pandemic, and it seems to have always been here and always been part of our lives. But a little bit of background. So what was COVID-19? In a single sentence, it was a virulent respiratory pandemic with serious health consequences. And that's really where we're sitting with and what we're sitting with continually today. It spread rather quickly, and it was similar to influenza. And of course, the two big factors were that there was the surface contamination and of course air contamination, and that played a huge role in terms of transport and logistics, as you can quite imagine. A great shock to us all was that all the medicinal interventions were ineffective. So all the vodka and whiskey we drank with our tea and coffee in the evenings just didn't seem to help us, just gave us a bigger headache. And then of course, rapid infections, and then these resultant deaths that started to come up really created a lot of panic. So the initial global reaction was, after all of this panic, was to prevent social movement and interaction, which was the lockdown term that we all became used to or started to be thrown around all around the world. And of course, in South Africa, it meant a business operation shutdown for 2 months in South Africa. What's important is that those 2 months of shutdown was a little bit more than that, but those 2 months of shutdown and a couple of other little shutdowns or business closures or business restrictions that were happening around that period have an impact and are still having an impact on business sustainability and, more importantly, the operational methods to this very day. Right, what happened with road freight? Well, first of all, the essential logistics was allowed to operate under tight protocols. And essential logistics really was around medicines, it was around food, it was around fuels. So a very, very tight set of what could be transported and packaged and stored around the country over those 2 months. So adaptations started to happen. Of course, that meant all non-essential transportation ceased. And what happened was a fair amount of companies just disappeared. Now, if they were large companies, you would have read about them in the local news or in national news. If they were listed companies, and you would have seen 1 or 2 of those companies going into trouble, and there still are some of them today who are in trouble, we would have read about that. But a lot of companies closed their doors quietly overnight. The old adage of, if a tree falls in a forest, do you hear it falling? Volumes dropped, even in terms of essentials, but volumes dropped. because the way of life of people had changed. And this is one of the most important things that we need to highlight, is to understand that the world as we knew it on the 27th of March 2020 is no longer with us. On the 28th of March 2020, the world changed, totally changed, and it is continuing to change, and will never go back to what it was on the 27th of March 2020. You've heard a lot about employees in the previous presentation. Employees were hard hit, and there were really three groupings of employees that started to form in these 2 months of the lockdown and are continually out there in the workspace and are continually changing and adapting. And employers, and I'm an employer as well, have to look at how we manage these three groups and where we're going to go going into the future. So there were essential groupings, the guys who worked with all of those essential products I spoke about and still do, who really kept the country going, both in terms of keeping it on its feet and in terms of health. Then there were a bunch who were sent home and said, well, don't worry, we'll call you back when things return to normal. And we all understand that that normal is going to be a different normal. I don't like using the term a new normal. And then, of course, there were a number who were retrenched. In terms of fleet, well, there were those who were terminated. Literally, that was the end of business. A lot of fleets, there was diminished use in terms of those assets, a lot of vehicles standing around, and hopefully in some of those instances that allowed for maintenance work and what have you. But when that wasn't an essential, that couldn't happen either. One of the big changes is property. First of all, what happened was there was a lot of congestion. So you had stock starting to move into warehouses that were still moving. You'll recall a fair amount of debate around allowing international freight to move. And there was a period when nothing moved. So what happened was that the port started to fill up with boxes, containers, and other sort of freight coming in. And so over a period of time, took us about 5 to 6 months, we started moving stock from literally the quayside to the very next warehouse, and as that warehouse filled up to the next warehouse. So that happened on the one side. On the other side, and I'm sure some of you have gone shopping, DIY is a good example. You go in to try and buy some cornice or some wood or some paint, or you try to find some furniture, or you try to find material or spares for your vehicle. You suddenly find that a lot of suppliers, retailers are saying, we don't have stock at the moment. It might be a month or two to get it. So there was some understocking. And then, of course, there was a lot of loss in terms of businesses closing down. So property has changed, and I'll talk about that going a little bit forward. Most importantly, all development stopped. So any sort of exploration, whether it was under mining, whether it was under technology type of exploration, we were right at that stage looking at all the electric vehicles, the so-called non-environmental pollutants, the alternative systems to energy, the different styles of platforms for trucks, in other words, in the way in which we'd carry freight, how we'd carry that freight, technology in terms of braking systems, only from a vehicle fleet point of view, but there was all other sorts of developments, all ceased. It all stopped. So we've actually now behind in a lot of the processes and projects we had in place, and then construction stopped because that wasn't an essential service, and construction here isn't only infrastructure construction, so buildings and bridges and roads and those sort of things. We're also talking about building vehicles and warehouses and things like that. Some of the stats. During those first 2 months, and I've made it 2 months, it's a little bit more, but let's call it 2 months. During those 2 months, more than 40% of transport companies in South Africa stopped operating. Stopped. There wasn't, they could do this, they could do that. They stopped operating. Those companies who moved only essential goods, so the fuels and the medical stuff and the food and that type of jazz, operated, if you were lucky, between about 75% and about 15%. We did a fair amount of surveys in those heady months of the first 4 or 5 months of the lockdown. So now you can imagine, most freight companies need 100% of the assets to be moving 100% of the time. Now you're only operating at 75% or 15%, and they were considered to be the lucky companies because they were still operating. Look at that statistic in terms of companies and how they dealt with their employees. More than 70% of companies had to reduce employee levels because It was only essential groupings, essential goods that were actually working, so the balance was sent home, which in the beginning sounded like quite a good thing because, well, you went home, you stayed safe, you would be paid a salary, the whole tour system came into operation. But was that a good thing? And was it sustainable? And I think that's what we're going to start finding out far more clearly as we progress in the next couple of months. There were retrenchments, and I've made a statement that they're undefined, but we know that at least 50% of our members, so 50% of road freight operators, we are quite sure across the country, have retrenched employees. Some of them might only have been one or two, and we know that those that have closed down have retrenched a fair amount of employees. So those have happened. Also, 50% of the companies have reassessed their property needs. And I'll talk to that point a little bit later because that's the stone or the rock that's been thrown into the pool and those ripples that are rippling out in terms of the freight industry. But 100% of companies have actually changed their operational methods. COVID wasn't only bad, we have learned a massive amount of information about how to run transport and logistics in this country. So what are the trends? Well, first of all, there's a lot of corporate policy change. And that corporate policy deals with offices. We have seen companies downsizing from their offices. We have seen companies doing away with offices. We have seen companies going totally virtual. Might be a good or a bad thing. Even the RFA has changed the way it operates. We have apps, we have gone virtual, and we've learned a lot of things, and we've got rid of offices around the country. Why do you need to spend a lot of money if your method in getting to your customers or your members can actually be improved through various other means? Travel has basically died in terms of business travel. And of course, that affects the tourism industry in terms of where people stay to go to meetings. So for example, a lot of our governance meetings, our board meetings, our statutory committee meetings have all become virtual meetings. And strangely enough, attendance has been far better. And the method around that has changed. The reporting methodologies have changed. The interaction has changed. So that has been a big change in the freight industry, in the way in which these companies run and implement their corporate policy. Business operating methods are changing. And you'll see I speak to e-freight and e-technology and e-business a little bit later. But the reason that's happening is because all companies have realized they can actually cut the operating costs. And if you're not watching your operating costs and your revenue is restricted, you have a problem. E-commerce is becoming more and more relevant and far more popular. Probably about 10 years ago, no one really would have thought about ordering their groceries and their standard sort of everyday items through an app and getting it delivered to the door. Half of the interesting thing on a weekend was actually to go to the mall. Have you been to malls lately and seen what's happening there? I've had a couple of colleagues telling me they can actually buy things on the internet cheaper from halfway around the world. This isn't only a South African thing. This is a global thing. The actual global market suddenly came knocking on our doors after March last year, a lot sooner than we thought it would come knocking. So the realities now are that when guys look at contracts and when they sign their contracts, they have to make sure that there's actually the opportunity to generate income and generate surpluses because they need to expand. Expansion is the thing that is going to help us get through the COVID-19 as we know it, and the next couple of levels of COVID. And believe me, COVID, the disease and the effects, is probably going to be here for at least 3 years in the medium term, maybe short term, and about 5 years in the medium term, in terms of what it has done to business and in terms of how we need to adapt our business, because we need to be able to develop. There's now a huge uptake in investing in technology to stay competitive. So this e-commerce has driven a whole lot of new technology drives to make sure that people remain relevant and in the market. You've seen a number of chains that have closed, and one of those reports from one of those chains was that customers don't need to walk into the store. They can go onto the internet or to the web, whichever you'd like to call it, and actually find products at a competitive, if not cheaper price, because commercial real estate is not involved in the pricing model, and get it delivered to their door efficiently and safely. So it's maintaining that efficiency and safety in the business, in the logistics loop, that is probably the most important aspect that a lot of people are looking at right now. The market information, knowing what is happening around the world and the changes and trends, is what companies really are focusing on now, ensuring that they stay ahead of that curve, staying right on the top of the wave, and then being able to protect the capital reserves. We've learned from what happened in COVID that we need to have sound reserves in the background so that we are able to ride through a wave like this. And I don't think this is the last of these sort of pandemics. I think we're going to face a couple of these going forward in the next couple of decades. I don't think this is a unique thing. So we need to be careful of how we run our businesses. So what happens is you need to make sure that you have a partner, and the RFA and the road freight industry is that partner, but you need to make sure wherever you work that you have free advice on being able to make sure your contracts are feasible, that you have technical expertise, and I'm speaking to this in terms of transport and logistics, that you have an assistance with some sort of compliance conformance program that allows you to maintain standards, that the corruption and extortion that we see that's happening is dealt with, and it's dealt with quickly. That seems to have one of the biggest bleeders in terms of available capital, in terms of the way in which business is done, that there are practical solutions brought to the table to ensure that your business runs smoothly and sustainably. And of course, things like this today are worth their weight in gold. The webinars and workshops that are out there that talk about common challenges. I think one of the things we've learned since the advent of COVID is to actually start using the information that is out there. There is so much data. There is so much information. A lot of companies pay for gathering information through various systems, and a tracking telematics system is one of them. But there are a lot of companies who have people who sit on the webinars, on workshops, and in the internet and gather information, being able to use that information to ensure that you keep going. And then, of course, that you link to whatever interest groups and WhatsApp groups that would support you. The support that we give going forward now, there's this talk about the third wave. I think there are going to be a number of waves. And the third wave was started because there was this increase in infections that started to come across from the east. And of course, we're going into winter. There's now this expectation that we will have something similar to that. It's important to ensure that your support structures are in place. And there are various support structures. What do we do in terms of supporting going into these sorts of waves? Well, for example, making sure that you have updates on policies that could affect your businesses, the cost schedules and how to run your business, webinars that ensure you stay ahead of the curve, you stay in the curve and ahead of the curve, making sure that if you need assistance in prosecution, that is in place, making sure that your customers understand that there is quality in what you do, meeting those protocols, making sure that your health protocols are in place, making sure that your employees are protected in terms of the types of functions they need to perform, making sure that your customers can go to an association that can ensure them on terms of the protocols. I spoke about standards in terms of a quality system. So once again, customer base, that the customers understand that in the greater scheme of things, where you are as a business is that you are a transparent, you're a reliable business, that you have support from the various associations. And then of course, learnings. I learned a lot today in terms of the information in the last couple of presentations. And that's the important thing, is that we learn from the information that is out there at our fingertips. Labor is a huge aspect at the moment, and we see right now, not only the government sector, but in terms of a lot of individual other sectors, that there's unrest. That's an important thing. And the previous presentation spoke around HR employees. It's important that you look after your employees going forward, as well as in terms of developing them. And there are various methods in terms of doing that and how you look after them. So the next wave, keep to the guidelines, follow those guidelines. Those protocols are quite simple. Share what works and what doesn't work. That's not collusion. if it's around ensuring there is safety for your employees, ensuring that we keep this pandemic where it should be, nice and tightly controlled in a box, it should be. Update yourself on the risks that are there without spreading rumors. Make sure that you know what's happening going forward. Make sure you understand the impact it could have on your business. When government asks for input and you have some ideas, put those ideas in, because government doesn't have all the answers. We've got to make sure that there are sustainable decisions that are made. We don't go into the type of lockdowns that we've seen in the very beginning in terms of this. But the bottom line is common sense, people. Follow the health protocols. Ensure you protect your business in terms of that. Ensure you protect your employees in terms of that. And we will get through this. Thank you very much.
Gavin, thank you for those insights into the area of business that made it possible for us to survive COVID. You did mention and miss one, I must just point out, that was the communication industry, which if we hadn't had this type of communication during COVID, I'm sure many of us would have suffered even more adversely. So Gavin, thank you for those insights, and we trust that you will share this information. And as you may know, it's recorded. If you'd like to disseminate this amongst your members, please feel free to do so. The highlight of the afternoon, or we're in the morning still, is something that we believe will empower all people, particularly ladies. Given the fact that gender-based violence is more common than what we'd like it to be, we've invited Mark Grobbelaar, who we've worked with on a number of years. Very briefly, we started working together when we trained Miss South Africa at the time, Demi Moore, and we've continued to work together with various participants in the finalists of Miss South Africa. So we invite Mark, and please remember, he will be giving away 20 free virtual training sessions. But now let's look at his live demonstration for us. Mark Grobbelaar, please.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Eugene, for this opportunity again. Just by way of introduction, my name is Mark. I'm the founder of a concept called Women Empowered initially. So just to give you a little bit of background, I hold a 6th Dan in karate. I've been doing karate since I was 9 years old. After my friend Alison was abducted outside her home about 25 years ago, I'm sure many of you will remember her story. She was abducted, her throat slit, she was raped, and she was pretty much left for dead. I wrote a thesis on personal protection or self-defense for women, and I sent Alison a copy, and she phoned me in tears and said, Mark, had I known what was in that thesis, what happened to me would never have happened. So that was the formation of Women Empowered. You can see behind me, see, wrong way, everything's in reverse now, Women Empowered. Then we realized a couple of years after that there was a need for a concept for men as well, because, guys, let's be honest, there's this perception that because we're men, we're born with a certain skill set, that because I'm a man, I know how to fight, and because I'm a man, I always know where I'm going, I don't need directions, which we all know is wrong. Sorry, gents, to hang us out there, but you are not born with a certain skill set because of your gender. We then went on, because of the two brands behind me, and we formed Inpowered, because the power's inside you. I'm going to chat about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But COVID, wow, what it did to us. You can imagine our business is pretty much me standing in front of a room full of people and running them through a personal protection program. So when COVID hit in just about this time last year, just before COVID hit, I was supposed to be in the Ivory Coast. We were going to do a course for the African Development Bank, 250 odd women in Abidjan. Just that piece of business alone would have set me up for a year or two at least. Obviously, the spin-offs from that would have been huge. So we went into lockdown, and I think, like a lot of us, I stuck my head in the sand, and I figured, well, after 3 weeks or so, everything will return to normal, and we'll carry on as we did before. At some stage in that process, the realization really hit me, and to Gavin's point before, the realization hit me that the world would never be the same. It would never be the same, and especially in our industry, in my industry, the world would never be the same. And so I suppose for a while I sat and I mulled about it, and then we realized that that we had to do something about it. So what has COVID done for us as a business? So initially we realized, with the advent of all these softwares that suddenly hit the market, Zoom, etc., that we could deliver our message virtually. I was mentioning when I chatted to Eugene a couple of days ago that somebody that attended the last MasterDrive event that I was at from Standard Bank Asset Finance actually contacted me early on, and we did a wonderful, let's just call it an online program for a whole bunch of their staff, where we had 250 odd people in the, let's just call it the first session. And then we realized that we could actually deliver pretty much our whole message, especially the physical side, because there's a theory side and there's a physical side to the program. We could deliver the theory pretty easily over this type of medium. And we then realized that we could also deliver the practical, let's just call it the physical component of the program virtually. I just want to grab something so you can all see. Those of you that have seen me chat or whatever before, so what happens in our program, quite a big part of it is that everybody punches through a board like this. Now, that was clearly a bit of a problem if I wasn't physically there. So, again, we went through quite a few teething problems, and we came up with the idea of delivering boards to everybody. We filmed some, it's just called the little promo videos that we sent out to people, say, this is how you need to hold the board, you need to get someone to help you hold the board, etc., etc. We even came up with a concept called drive-through breakthrough, which you do the whole program. I see you do the technique online, and I say, okay, I'm happy with you. You can now come past our offices, drive through, you pull up outside, you walk through our studio. I'm actually standing in our studio at the moment, as we call it, which is actually my garage, lighting, backdrop, etc. It's amazing what you can do when you have no other option. So we've really changed the way we do things to be able to deliver a product in a virtual world. Now, that's pretty cool. We've been doing quite a bit. There's still, so we often say, no, we can deliver the product from full on-site to full virtual or online, or a combination of both. Now, I'm sure everybody on this call will have in some shape or form over the last while done some sort of course, some sort of program, some sort of thing online. And it dawned on me that there was that for my business to survive and for us to sort of move into the next phase, so to speak, I would need to be able to do that. So what we've done is we've because of necessity through COVID, as mentioned, we've now been able to deliver the course virtually online through a platform like Zoom. We've now also filmed the whole program by ourselves, again, necessity being the mother of need. We've turned our website into a virtual online store. We've in this little studio that I'm standing in, we filmed, I think, 33 or 34 what we call lectures. And again, if you'd said to me a year ago you would be teaching or showing online what you do, I would have said it's absolutely impossible. Can't be done. Yeah, no way. If you'd said to me that I would be filming what you do, and that somebody on the other side of the world could probably do the program online in real time, not in real time, sorry, online in their own time, I would have said it's absolutely impossible. But again, it's amazing so for us as a business, COVID, I suppose, came with, there were two sides to the coin. It really slaughtered us, as I'm sure a lot of other people will attest to, a lot of the gentlemen that have spoken before me around their business. I had pretty much all my business dry up this time last year. I was really booked up for the year. So while it's done that, I think it's also opened a myriad of opportunities for us as a business. Now, I can now deliver this program anywhere in the world. We've also realized through some really clever technology that we can also deliver it in any language. I was chatting to someone the other day. There's so much clever stuff out there at the moment online where you can pretty much bring up, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but me, I personally, I prefer to watch, for example, an Italian movie with subtitles as opposed to being dubbed. So with all this clever technology, this course of ours can now be, anybody can view it anywhere in the world, pretty much in any language, at any time, in their own time. So it's really changed the way we do things, as you can see. We haven't quite seen the fruits of that yet, but I believe we're moving into that space. And again, to Gavin's point earlier, the world will never be the same. You have to have, I believe, a combination of full on-site to full virtual, or a combination thereof, something in between. Now, I know Gavin spoke about me doing a demo. I want to just share a couple of points with you around personal protection. And to Mark's point earlier, to Eugene's point earlier, in his introduction, he mentioned about choice. This wave, this third wave, that we have a choice. Now, believe it or not, in personal protection or in self-defense, you also have a choice. The fact is you only have 3 choices. You see, in a life or death situation, there are only 3 things you can do. And they are the only 3 human reactions to trauma. They are flight, fight, or freeze. Flight, in other words, leave, fight, or freeze. Now, fighting is an art. Fighting is you hit me, I hit you, you hit me, I hit you. That's an art. Now, to learn how to fight, you need to train, which I'll get to in a second. Or obviously, the last option is freeze, do nothing. Now, I want to make a statement. Whatever you do to an attacker that doesn't switch him off is going to make it worse. And if Eugene will excuse my French, if it doesn't switch him off, it's going to piss him off. It's going to make it worse. Do you want to infuriate someone? Do you want to infuriate someone that's intent on hurting you? No. So our whole concept, our whole philosophy is really different. Now, if I were to say to a group of people, or if I were to ask you to raise your hands, how many of you here think it's important to know how to defend yourself? I'm sure everybody will put their hands up because it's really important. But then if I were to ask you, how many of you here are doing regular self-defense classes? Pretty much all the hands will come down, because I believe in the back of your minds that you understand that self-defense is, you probably perceive it as a waste of time. And it is for this particular reason, because self-defense says multiple attacks, multiple techniques, multiple positions, multiple scenarios. For that to work, you need to practice it every day, plenty hours every day. Not everybody wants to do that. So our philosophy is a little bit different. Our philosophy says, what if I could show you one thing that was super simple, that you didn't need to practice, that could immobilize anybody on the planet? If you knew what that one thing was, let me ask you, would you want to know what that one thing was? I believe everybody would say yes. Now, if you knew what that one thing was, could you make a choice? Flight, fight, take the word fight out, immobilize, freeze. So it's about choice. It's not about self-defense. Now, again, I think that there's even I just want to speak to let's just say the companies that are online here. I think you see, nothing has really changed as far as COVID is concerned. As Eugene mentioned earlier, gender-based violence has increased. A lot of people are now stuck at home with their abusers, so to speak. But the truth of the matter is that the rules don't really change. It doesn't really matter who you're being abused or assaulted by. The rules still say the same. In a life or death situation or an abusive situation, there are only 3 things you can do: fight, flight, or freeze. You know, if you're in a bad job, you know what? There's only 3 things you can do. Either you leave the job, you fight to change the job, or you do nothing about it. If you're in an abusive relationship, either you fight to change it, you leave it, or you do nothing about it. See, the rules don't really change. So what we find is we're finding people that are now shacked up with their abusers, so to speak. So the incidence of gender-based violence has gone through the roof, which is really sad. But I believe that the product that we deliver now more than ever is more important. A lot of people say, well, you know, we're at home now, so there's not that worry of being attacked or whatever the case is. But that's not really true. I'm sure all of you will agree with me. The amount of just vagrants around, the amount of petty crime, the amount of people standing around at the robots has tripled. People are desperate. People are doing desperate things. The need for something to keep yourself safe is more important than it ever was. You see, I just want to quickly take a piece of paper and read you guys something else so I don't get it wrong. There's a thing that's called duty of care. Now, I don't know if you guys heard recently recently on the interweb or FaceTube, whatever you call it, there was a case where a company actually went to court, where a company was liable for one of their staff members that had been assaulted or hurt or whatever while working for them as a result of a protest action or whatever. And there's a little thing called duty of care, and this is not spoken about enough. Duty of care quite simply means it's a legal obligation to safeguard others from harm while they're in your care, using your services, or exposed to your activities. That's big. That's big as an organization. So, I mean, to Mark's point earlier, when we spoke about human capital, for so many businesses, their human capital, their staff are one of their big investments. So, to what extent are we investing in our human capital? To what extent are we investing in our staff around personal protection? So around personal protection. I just want to quickly check my timing and make sure I'm not running over because I'm good, I think. Yeah, all good. So just back to what I said to you earlier, there are only 3 things you can do if you find yourself in a life or death situation: fight, flight, or freeze. Now, I said earlier, whatever you do that doesn't switch them off is going to make it worse. So whatever you do has to work. It has to be simple. Now, I'm not speaking, if you want to learn to defend yourselves, please find a regular martial arts class or find a martial arts class and train every day. Now, not everybody wants to do that. Now, I believe there's 2 bunches of people. There's a whole bunch of people here, which I call Chris Frickies. They've invariably got no hair and tattoos, which sort of throws me into that group. And then there's another people over here, a whole bunch of people here that know nothing. So, but then there's a whole bunch of people in the middle. They don't really want to train every day, get punched on the nose and thrown around, because that's what happens in that space. And then there's a whole bunch of people that know nothing. What about the people in the middle? What about the people that just want to know something? Now, Eugene alluded to earlier, we sort of started working together after we worked together with the Miss South Africa organization when the year that Demi won Miss South Africa and won Miss Universe. For those of you that don't know, she was in an attempted hijacking a couple of weeks or a couple of days after she was crowned Miss South Africa. Without getting into too much detail, she basically said, had she not known the information that she gained on our program, that she'd probably be dead today. I sort of pretty highlight the subject. And I mean, I often say when I'm dealing with people, if a guy walked up here with a gun, put a gun on your head and said, come with me, you're going somewhere. How many of you would go with that person? Now, invariably, most people put their hands up and they say, yes, of course I will, because you've got a gun. And then I say, so when you go with me to the second place, do things get better? And obviously the answer is no. You see, your chances of survival at the first place are 93%. Second place, less than 35. Third place, almost nothing. Just a simple piece of information like that could save your life. Don't go to the second place. Things get bad at the second place. Now, just quickly, I think still doing all right for time, Eugene? Yeah.
Mark, you've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay, wonderful. So guys, just quickly, I want to share something with you that could or could not help you going forward. We said there's only one thing, whatever you do needs to be simple, one thing. So we speak about there's only one target on the human body. One, and one alone, that if you strike it, you can immobilize anybody. Now, I'm not going to go through all the wrong targets, but often I get eyes, ears, nose, groin. There's only one target, people, it's the throat. It's the throat. If you strike someone in the throat, they will stop breathing. When someone stops breathing, they are immobilized. It's as simple as that. I said to you earlier, it's one thing you'll never forget, that you don't need to practice, that can immobilize anybody all the time. It's a punch to the throat. Now, just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to ask my colleague to come in, Derek. I asked him to dress up like a baddie, which he obviously hasn't so far. So guys, what happens in the Inpowered program? And again, this little piece was something that we found really challenging when we went virtual online, because it's quite important to be able to stand in front of somebody and show them what they're doing wrong, etc., etc. But even more so, when somebody has to now punch through a board, there's a whole bunch of complexities around the board. Now, while the Inpowered program is not about teaching you to break things, it's about showing you that maybe, just maybe, you can do something that you thought was impossible. I mean, to often say when I do these programs, I say to the woman, how many of you think you could immobilize me? And also, no, it's impossible, you're a karate guy. And then I ask them, well, how many of you think you can punch through this? You see, and then I rephrase it, because, let me rephrase it. If you don't, I often say, if you don't think you can, you can't. But I need to take that one step further. If you don't know you can, you can't. You see, in a life or death situation, you have to know what you're capable of. You have to know what will work. Not think, not surmise, not, well, I saw it on a movie. You have to know. And we achieve this by one simple action. So, okay, so here's a nice wooden board. So we explain, there's a whole bunch of technicalities around the punch that we deal with. But let me explain something. Once you've done this once, you'll know you can do it 1,000 times. Once you've done it once, you'll never forget that you did it or how you did it. And once you've done it once, it'll sit inside here forever. This gives you belief. This shows you that anything is possible if you focus on the other side of the barrier. So just quickly, this is what we call the zero position. So my hands, nice relaxed position. Could you get close enough to somebody standing like this? Yes, and we go from the zero position to the hero position. The key there is I'm focusing on a point behind the barrier. Now, just in closing, I want to ask you, where is your focus point? Where's your focus point in your life? Because let me explain something. COVID is a barrier. What was a barrier initially for us? So when COVID came, I was focusing on the barrier. What's going to happen? And then we sort of had to lift up our head and look on the other side. Where is the barrier in your life? Because COVID is a barrier. It has come, and as a lot of the speakers said before, it's going to be here for quite a while. But if we focus on COVID, we're never going to get to the other side. We need to focus on other things. Focus on something behind. Focus on the focus point. Where is your focus point in your life? Thank you very much, Eugene.
Mark, thank you very much. That was insightful, to say the least. And I'm sure that given the time and the opportunity, you would have been able to show us a lot more. And as much as as Mark emphasized the fact that there is violence in the home, on a lighter note, ladies, please don't go home to your husbands and say, hey, I want to practice this on you, because you're going to find a bunch of guys who won't be able to breathe for the next while. So, Mark, thank you very much. We now have opportunity for questions and answers. I have two questions that I'd like to table. And the one is directed at Hein, but he's left. So if there's anybody from Ctrack that will answer, otherwise I can field it for you. And that comes from Trevor Willemse. Could companies use this data as methods to either reward or discipline drivers? In fact, if I can give you the answer, Trevor, in simple terms, yes. But we're happy to put you in contact with the guys at Ctrack. Second question for Sharon, and this is directed to Barrie. I've previously downloaded Ping. However, it doesn't appear to work with WhatsApp Business. Barrie, if you're around, if you could care to comment, otherwise we will supply Sharon with your email address. Barrie, over to you.
Yeah, happy to chat to Sharon. WhatsApp is one of those tricky ones where they keep on moving their goalposts, but it should work, and it does work in most instances. So we have a really rapid support crew that is more than happy to work out what's going wrong and fix it for you, because WhatsApp's an important component of the South African communication system. So
okay,
we'll fix it.
Thanks, Barrie. Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? If you'd like to open your video, if I can see you, failing which, please mail to nashani@masterdrive.co.za for copies of this presentation or any information that you may need. Please feel free to do it. So now we're going to move over to the prize giving. But just before we do so, and we've got a list of names already, an opportunity to remind you of what we do. We've gathered together today partners and people that we work with because we are in the management of risk, and everything that you see here is in some way or other directed toward managing of risk, whether it's by driver training or whether it's by empowering ladies, or in fact even by giving them the emotional intelligence to deal with the problems that they face in the workload. So let's get to the prizes now, and we would like to share with you the first lot of prizes. The first one, if you can put that on the screen, prizes and giveaways. The first one is from Ctrack, One Assist Telematics Unit with 12 months subscription, and that is Cecile Janssen van Rensburg from Sasol Energy. Congratulations, please get hold of Nishani and she will get you the information for that. And then one, Barry indicated, we will be giving away 3 annual subscriptions to Ping Loud. The first one goes to Brandon Groene, Vodacom. Second one, Willem van Sail from Tata. And then Chantal Trodel from One Sure Midrand. Congratulations to you folks, and we love to have you part of the Distracted While Driving solutions in our community. And then before we announce the winner of the Trigger app, we alluded to earlier that we have been working with Mrs. South Africa, and one of the finalists is Johanni Steenkamp. So we're going to ask her to go live and tell her about a particular app. And we believe that periodically we come across some really powerful stuff that empowers people. Johanni is going to tell us what Trigger does, and then we will announce who the winner is after that. Johanni, over to you.
Thank you so much, Eugene, and what an absolute privilege to be part of this magnificent, awesome lineup this morning. I've enjoyed every second of this. So as the last Mark mentioned that, you know, we can see COVID as a barrier, but we can also look beside that. And as you just mentioned, Eugene, you mentioned that we are in the game of the management of risks. So what I'm about today is I just want to briefly tell you that I'm part of a company called Trigger, and we are also giving away this prize today, which MasterDrive will mention to you. But what we want you to do is we want you to live your life more. We want you to know that during this time of COVID, where the crime rate has risen immensely, trauma, suicide, gender-based violence, we've seen everything. We want you to still live your life and not pay a fortune by living that and have that peace of mind. So we want you to still carry on walking the dogs, driving, whatever it is that you want to do. And with this Trigger button, we are actually enabling you to have, by the press of a button, immediately have access to emergency and armed response, ambulance services, a lawyer on call, like if you need up to 5,000 Rand worth of bail, as I mentioned, roadside assistance, and trauma and suicide counseling. This work aside with an app. So to our Ping master who spoke about not looking at your phone while driving, this is ideal to use while not driving. So this is a phenomenal asset and tool to have, and to have your peace of mind. So I just want to say that one lucky winner will walk away with one of these and a 6-month subscription of Trigger today.
Johanni, thank you very much. As you can see, guys, we're very fortunate. We work with the rich and famous. Johanni, we hope you're rich, all right? And then the famous people out there. And it's a privilege to exercise and influence through these people safer driving and a number of other things. And the winner of the One Trigger app is Zandra Ferber. Zandra, congratulations. Maybe you'll need it to keep you safe on the walk back to your office. We're now going to go through the 20 winners of the virtual protection program offered by Mark. But just before, we need to pay the rent, guys. So please, a little bit about MasterDrive. You know that we do driver training. So if you need anything along those lines, please don't forget us. And new participants over here, we're part of the solution because we don't want road safety to play second place to COVID safety. And while we were during lockdown, we're glad to tell you that we not only developed our virtual programs, our e-learning programs, we'll be giving away 3 of those. We also opened new offices in the north of Johannesburg. We extended our training facilities in Cape Town, to cater for improved social distancing. And then we opened a new branch in Port Elizabeth. So we're on the move, and as Gavin indicated in his discussion, it's an opportunity for growth. We're now going to read out the names of the winners of the virtual self-defense courses, and in no particular order. First one, Danielle Fenter from Denon, Thurston Williams from Bidvest, Simon Masista from Denon, Daniel Bakella, Unitrans, Dirk Smith from Impala Platinum, Tia Lindeque, Avis Fleet, Ridge Moodley from AVI, Ismail Nkolo, Express Petroleum, Yolandi van Aarde from SA Biomedical, Hein Jonker, Grindrod Logic, Tim Mabuza, Zwizonki Transport, Trevor Willemse from Cortiva, Mary Mashani, Crossroads, Jan Swiggers from Natura, Samir Sajan from G4S, Colleen Reed from Philip Morris, Miriam Bueta from Nestle, Geneva Martin from Bidvest Executive Flora, Emma DeYago, Barlow World Equipment, Ulrika Spencer from One Sure, and then so that was those 20 self-defense courses, virtual ones, and then the 3 giveaways from MasterDrive, our e-learning programs, Mandla Mshazi from Air Products, Rudy van Rensburg from Take a Lot, and Wendy Detterly from TFG. By the way, guys, if the self-defense course doesn't appeal to you, please, you've got wives, partners, friends, or girlfriends, we're happy that you shared that with them. So thank you very much to everyone who participated. Thank you for all those in attendance. I'm sure that as we run through the final concluding video and presentation, you will see that we've got our next colloquium planned, and we would hope that you will join us over there. So to those who worked in the background, our team at MasterDrive, thank you to Nishani, Lauren, and of course, Samantha. And you will read about this. We will make the copy of the presentation available to you. And then for our guest speakers, and let's not forget the audience, those who attended. Thank you very much, and have a really, really awesome day. And with that, we're going to run the final comments.